Hannibal Hamlin, one of the most significant politicians from the state of Maine and Abraham Lincoln's first vice president, is not well remembered in history. When Dr. Hunt, author of Hannibal Hamlin of Maine, Lincoln's first vice president, was asked why this is the case, he said,
Lincoln is kind of like a large tree who shades everything underneath it.
Hannibal Hamlin deserves a place in history. Over the course of his political career, he fought to change the social order in the United States for African Americans from slave to freedman to citizen. He may not have been the most prominent anti-slavery politician of the age, but he was a significant voice for freedom. Hannibal Hamlin was born on August 27, 1809, in South Paris, Maine. He worked as a farmer, newspaper publisher, and school teacher. Hamlin studied law under the abolitionist Samuel C. Fessenden, who refused Hamlin's tuition payment, saying,
"I think you can make better use of the money than we can."
Hamlin was admitted to the bar in 1833 and won his first case on that same day. Hamlin entered politics in 1836 as a Democrat in the Maine House of Representatives. That same year, the U.S. Congress established a gag rule over the issue of slavery. In 1843, when Hamlin joined the U.S. House, his first speech was a powerful attack on the gag rule.
The right of petition was not an abstraction, but a clear, plain, and sacred constitutional right, neither to be denied nor infringed upon.
That speech prompted former President John Quincy Adams to cross the Senate floor, shake Hamlin's hand, and remark,
"Light breaketh in the east."
While serving in the U.S. Congress, Hamlin spoke out and voted against the expansion of slavery in opposition to his own Democratic Party. He spoke against slavery in Texas, spoke and voted in favor of California and Oregon entering the Union as free states, against popular sovereignty in Utah and New Mexico, and voted for the Wilmot Proviso twice. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was introduced. The act allowed popular sovereignty in Kansas and Nebraska, as well as repealing the Missouri Compromise. Again, Hamlin voted against his party.
Sir, I hold that the repeal of the Missouri Compromise was a gross, moral, and political wrong, unequaled in the annals of any other free country. It lies at the foundation of all our misfortunes and commotions.
Hamlin could no longer abide his party's stance on slavery. When the Republicans approached Hamlin to run for governor of Maine, Hamlin took the offer. As a Republican, Hamlin won both the governorship and a Senate seat. He resigned the governorship and returned to Washington for his third Senate term. In 1859, the Republicans wanted Hamlin to be the vice presidential nominee. Even though Hamlin refused, the Republicans put him on the ballot anyway. The Lincoln-Hamlin team won the 1860 presidential election, but lost the South. In 1861, South Carolina, Missouri, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas all seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. On April 12, 1861, Fort Sumter was fired upon and the Civil War began. During the Civil War, Hamlin mustered troops from Maine to fight, including two of his own sons, Charles and Cyrus. Hamlin spent a lot of time in Maine during the Civil War because he felt ignored in Washington in his new role as vice president. This is a letter Hamlin helped his youngest son to write to his older brother Cyrus. On the left side of the page is Hannibal Hamlin's transcription of Hanny E. Hamlin's 5-year-old script on the right. Cyrus kept this letter until his death.
My dear brother, Cyrus Hamlin, I should think you could come home because you have been through the war so long a time. I hope you can come home. This Hanny wrote, Hanny E. Hamlin.
During the Civil War, Hamlin ceased merely to be against the spread of slavery and became instead an abolitionist. He believed the Civil War could only be won if slavery ended and the African Americans joined the war.
He, like Lincoln, was a strong voice in favor, first of all, of preventing the spread of slavery, second of all, of emancipating the slaves, and also, as you know, with Cyrus Hamlin, the use of Negro troops. There were about 150,000 black troops in the Civil War, and Hamlin was one of the voices in favor of doing that.
Frederick Douglass and other abolitionists lobbied Lincoln relentlessly for emancipation and arming of the African Americans. Lincoln first claimed that the war was about maintaining the Union and not a fight over slavery, but he eventually realized that the only way to win the war was through the use of African American troops. Lincoln shared with Hamlin a draft of the Emancipation Proclamation 6 weeks before he showed it to his own cabinet. Hamlin may have pressed Lincoln for it, but said,
"The Emancipation Proclamation was Lincoln's own act, and no one else can claim any credit whatever in connection with it."
The Emancipation Proclamation was a turning point in the war, but only the beginning of the fight for rights of African Americans. Hannibal Hamlin's son, Cyrus Hamlin, an advocate of enlistment of colored troops, was a first colonel of the 80th Colored Regiment, called the Ullman's Brigade. The following quote, taken from the book 12 Americans, explains how Cyrus, some enlisted friends, and Hannibal Hamlin all had roles in integrating the Union Army. One evening, while this was the situation, a deputation of 10 Army officers, all brave, well-informed, and earnest men, though none of them of particularly high rank, went to the Vice President's lodgings and begged him to urge the President to authorize the arming of Negroes.
"If such a thing can be done,"
said Mr. Hamlin, after hearing them through,
"would you and other men like you be willing to command the colored troops?"
"Yes, sir, gladly," they replied, almost in a breath.
"Very well.
Was the decisive response of Mr. Hamlin.
If you are willing to undertake the task, I will see to it that you have an opportunity of presenting your views to the President."
Saying this, though it was 10 o'clock at night, he sent a messenger to the White House, asking when it would be convenient for Mr. Lincoln to see him and his army friends. The President, without delay, fixed an interview for 8 o'clock the next morning. At that hour, Mr. Hamlin, with the 10 officers, went to the White House. The latter fully presented their case to Mr. Lincoln. When they had done so, he turned to Hamlin and asked, evidently much perplexed,
"What is your best judgment about this?"
"I think,"
was the reply,
"that these gentlemen are entirely right. If they are ready to move, if they and other good men like them are ready to give up their present positions and take places in Negro regiments, I am sure it is but right that you should give them authority to do so."
"Yes, yes,"
repeated the President 3 or 4 times, and then, with the exclamation,
"I suppose the time has come,"
he turned to his desk and for a few moments wrote rapidly. Then, turning to Hamlin, he said,
"Here is an order to Secretary Stanton authorizing the arming of colored troops."
Negative reaction to integration of the Union Army was widespread. Within months of the Emancipation Proclamation and authorization of African American troops, racist political cartoons and newspaper articles were prevalent. However, after the Massachusetts 54th's famous charge on Fort Wagner, the portrayal of the African American soldier partially changed from racist to heroic. The reforms that came out of African Americans in the military were slow. There was great inequality between African American and white troops, the most obvious being that African American soldiers were seen as unfit to lead troops. African American troops received less drilling, inferior medical treatment, and more fatigue duty, jobs like clearing the battleground of the dead and burying them. They were offered less payment, though they refused to be paid at all if it was not the same as the white man. Near the end of the Civil War, the African American troops finally received equal pay. In 1864, the Confederates initiated the Fort Pillow Massacre. As many as 300 African American soldiers were killed after they surrendered. After this massacre, the Union refused to exchange prisoners until the Confederates stopped distinguishing between white and black prisoners. On April 9, 1865, the Civil War ended. Another large victory happened off the battlefield when the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed, completely outlawing slavery. Back in Washington, on a different sort of battlefield, Hannibal Hamlin lost the vice presidential nomination in 1864, followed by a lost Senate election. Hamlin remained in politics for the rest of his life, with his last public appearance being in 1891 in honor of Lincoln's birthday. Hannibal Hamlin was a voice for freedom in Lincoln's ear, and he deserves to be remembered in history. Hamlin was at the center of the issue of slavery, and was a part of the effort to stop racism in the military, and was a leading figure of the anti-slavery cause. Hamlin may not have been the most important abolitionist in the U.S., but he was a significant voice for freedom.